Named after the ancient African city in Egypt, Memphis, Tennessee would be the final battleground for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This is Vernon Ash reporting. Considered by many to be a modern-day prophet, in his short life of 39 years, Dr. King touched the hearts of millions in America and around the world, and his legacy of nonviolent direct action continues even decades after his passing. Later, you'll hear actor Moses Peace in his portrayal of Dr. King as he gives an inspired speech of this writer's thinking on what the slain civil rights leader might say if alive today. But first, some thoughts about Dr. King from exclusive interviews with historical figures who remember the prophet and the times. These reflections in history feature the former Stokely Carmichael, now known as Kwame Ture, Minister Louis Farrakhan, Reverend James Netters, photographer Ernest Withers, and the Reverend Samuel Kiles.
Becoming cautious, that is, not to attack the federal government, and he was being put in a position where it appeared that he was a coward, afraid to attack a moral position which he had to attack. And if you notice, when King began to attack the American government, King said things about the American government that if I said, they would call me crazy. I mean, he said the American government was the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. I mean, that's a serious statement. So King's honesty was clear, and they recognized that once he came against the federal government, he came after them. He wasn't cautious in his attack against them for the war in Vietnam. Certainly, by the time he heightened his demonstrations on the Poor People's Campaign, it was clear here that he was going against the federal government. And it was clear here to them that now they could no longer stop him. So they had to kill him. But the problem was, since he was honest, if they started the killing from the left, every time they killed from the left, King would move to the left. And they saw this from the march from Memphis to Jackson. On the march from Memphis to Jackson, what SNCC was effective in doing was that while in the little church here, before we began the march, there was Mr. Roy Wilkins representing the NAACP, there was Mr. Whitney Young representing the Urban League, there was Mr. Floyd McKissick representing the Congress of Racial Equality, there was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and there was Martin Luther King representing the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Now we in SNCC had already decided that no organization sitting in that room knew Mississippi like we did. Okay. We were the only ones working in Mississippi and the Congress of Racial Equality, but CORE had its staff in the southern part of the state, down by Macomb. We knew the Delta. As a matter of fact, I was the 2nd Congressional District of the Delta. That entire march I mapped out because I had opened every town in the Delta, from Holly Springs all the way down to Belzoni. I knew all the sheriffs in there. I knew all the strong people. I've been in all the jails. I knew which churches were open to us. So we knew that we had this territory. It was ours. We could do what we wanted. Consequently, the first thing we recognized was we had to eliminate the NAACP and the Urban League from the march. Because whenever the 5 of us sat together, the Urban League and the NAACP would move to the right. SNCC and CORE would move to the left. And King would walk up the middle smelling like a rose. So what we had to do was to eliminate the NAACP and the Urban League. That would leave SNCC and CORE on the left and King on the right. And King would be forced to move to the left. So once we eliminated the NAACP and the Urban League from the march, and if people look properly at that march, King moved rapidly to the left on that march. I mean, if you look at his program from his statements when he started, when he finished, they knew that King, left alone, would have to go to the left. So they recognized if they started killing on the left, King would move to the left. The error they made, and the error that all oppressors make, is that they really think they know the oppressed. And these stupid pigs actually thought that we loved King, and loved King to the point that if they killed King, we would listen to King and be nonviolent. So they were certain that when they killed King, we would be nonviolent. As a matter of fact, Lyndon Baines Johnson, they had programs set up all across the country in churches for memorial programs. But when King was shot, nonviolence also was buried by the masses of the people. This is what no one wants to recognize. Since nonviolence was buried with King's death, it meant that none of the organizations were capable of sustaining that action. Consequently, they had now to regroup themselves. It was clear SCLC was finished. It was clear that all those preaching nonviolence was finished because none of them could quell the wrath of our people against the racist system for killing King. You know, if they'd kill anybody else, they would have gotten away with it. You know, I remember when we started the march right here, and the policeman pushed King, and I jumped at the policeman. When we had the meeting, nobody from SCLC could reproach me, because when that pig pushed King, they felt the same way I did. They wanted to get him. You understand? So none could say anything, and King was the one who could speak. So that night when we got quiet, King said, well, you know, Kwame, this is a nonviolent march. And I said, yes, sir, it is. He said, and it doesn't look good if the press have to say that I'm holding you back from attacking a policeman. You're supposed to be representing the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And we agreed to nonviolence. I told him, Dr. King, I've agreed to nonviolence. I said, now you know the Justice Department, you know the Kennedys and all these people. You call them. You tell them that if they don't want trouble out of this march, if they want it to be nonviolent, these racist pigs can touch anybody they want, starting with me. But if they touch you, nonviolence is finished. That's exactly what I told King that night at that meeting. And nobody in SCLC said anything because they knew it was the truth. So once they killed King, what I knew was the truth. They could kill anybody, but once they killed King, they were finished. So once they killed King, and we burnt 269 cities in one weekend. There was no way they could check that. And once that was done, the people was on the way to violence, so there was no way now to coalesce this activity. The enemy knew it, that is to say, the spontaneous wrath of the masses had overgrown the organizations. They had overswelled them. The organizations had no longer the basis. So all the FBI knew they had to do was to cause confusion inside these organizations with their weakness. The ones that were a threat, they could destroy. The ones they didn't destroy, they'd be able to contain, and people would hop along for a while.
How would you describe your personal relationship with Dr. King?
Oh, we had the greatest relationship. I had the greatest love and respect for Dr. King and admiration. And my love and respect for Dr. King was simply because he loved his people. He loved his people. And it's very difficult for us to find people who say they are leaders to really love their people. But King loved his people. Not only did King love his people, King was unafraid. Because every time you saw King, he was on the front lines, and King knew he could be killed any time. Matter of fact, they wanted King more than they wanted anybody else. Because for them, he was the most popular leader in the country, and he was at that time. And the other thing about King was uncompromising, and he was incorruptible. He was incorruptible materially and immaterially. And for this, I will always love King. So we had a great relations, even when the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee had disagreements with King. And even though I took that position, I always had a great relation with King. As a matter of fact, when I became chairperson of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and we issued the statement, hell no, we won't go, King did not take a position against the war in Vietnam. King dragged his feet, and we were in struggle with King. And I was leading this struggle. Of course, this struggle was nonviolent. When we saw him, we would raise issues with him. How could you tell us to be nonviolent in Mississippi and not be nonviolent in Hanoi? You know, and raise real contradictions with him. So much so to the point that when King was ready to make his speech against the war in Vietnam, he called me. I was in Atlanta. I never forget. It was a Saturday night. He called me.
What did he say to you?
He called me. He said, what you doing tomorrow? It was Sunday. I said, oh, tomorrow is Sunday. I said, well, you know, I'm not lucky like you preachers. I'm just a poor heathen. I have to work on Sundays.
Okay.
You know. So he said, you going to work? He said, I'm preaching tomorrow. I said, well, that's good. He said, won't you come hear me preach? I said...